They have continued to carry out attacks on Israel and Israel on the Houthis. And so that situation is actually escalating at the moment because earlier this week, a Houthi ballistic missile was able to evade Israel's air defenses and hit Ben Gurion International Airport, which is the primary airport in Israel.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle, and I'm joined today by defense reporter Mike Brest. Mike, there have been talk about fewer generals, some cuts to people of that rank. Give us and there's some concern about this. Give us a little bit on what the administration plans to do and who might be affected.
So, Secretary Hegseth came out with a memo earlier this week that announced he wants to see a 20% reduction at a minimum in four-star generals. To give you a little bit of context, some statistics that he has referenced a couple times now is that there were fewer than 20 4- and 5-star generals when the United States won World War II. They were commanding an army of roughly 12 million troops. Right now, there are more than 40 4-star general positions commanding a military of a little over 2 million troops. So when you compare those two figures from the 40s to now, you see that the military has gotten very top-heavy. There are a lot of senior leaders. Now, there are those who argue that that's a good thing. There are those that argue that it's not a bad thing. And then there are some concerns that people have had with the Secretary's announcement of this plan, given that he has already fired some 4-star generals, including General C.Q. Brown, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He fired the Chief of Naval Operations. He fired the number 2 in the Air Force. And so he already has reduced the number of 4-stars. So far, though, these are positions that will almost certainly be filled and not cut, given the Secretary's plan. That being said, a number of experts who I've talked to, both veterans and non, are raising concerns that this could be a loyalty test of sorts. That the Secretary will, as this is carried out, will not look to necessarily eliminate positions, but eliminate individuals. And so that is a concern, but there's also a lot that we don't know, which is how they will determine which 4-star generals to get rid of, which positions to cut. And so there's a lot left to play out, but there are both people who are cautiously optimistic and people who are cautiously concerned at this point, and they're just waiting to see how exactly this will play out.
We've seemingly had a major development in Yemen this week. Give us a little bit of an update on that.
So President Trump announced earlier this week that the U.S. and the Houthis have agreed to a ceasefire between the two of them. And so dating back to the aftermath of Hamas's October 7th attack in October 2023, the Houthis began firing missiles and drones at commercial vessels transiting the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. And they were doing this, and it slowed trade down. It slowed global shipping and global commerce because these shipping companies had to make the determination that it was not worth the risk. And so they decided to have their vessels go on much longer, more expensive journeys to remain safe. And so the U.S. began this military operation in mid-March where they relentlessly bombed the Houthis day and night. Pentagon officials have said that they hit more than 1,000 targets during this 7-week operation. At the same time, the Houthis still possess the capabilities that they had, though fewer of them. And we know that because the Houthis have still been able to carry out attacks against Israel, even since the president announced this ceasefire. And so this is a fairly limited ceasefire between specifically what the U.S. was trying to accomplish and the Houthis. And what the U.S. was trying to accomplish was restore the freedom of navigation through those waterways. And so there's a lot of apprehension but optimism right now that this could be the start of the reopening of those waterways. But we've seen a lot of hesitance right now from those shipping companies because it's not clear that this will hold up long term. And so the Houthi spokespeople and Houthi officials have made it very clear in the first couple days since this was announced that this is not a ceasefire with Israel. They have continued to carry out attacks on Israel and Israel on the Houthis. And so that situation is actually escalating at the moment because earlier this week, a Houthi ballistic missile was able to evade Israel's air defenses and hit Ben Gurion International Airport, which is the primary airport in Israel that does international travel. And so that was a very big moment in Israeli society, and it led to Israeli officials declaring that they will more aggressively target the Houthis. And the Houthis have said all along that they started these attacks in the Red Sea in solidarity with Palestinians who were facing the Israeli operation in response to Hamas's attack. And so all of this is really intertwined, even though the current ceasefire is a very narrow agreement.
What's the latest in terms of, talks between Russia and Ukraine?
So at this exact moment, we've heard U.S. officials say that they're frustrated with Russia, that they believe the Russians are asking for too much in these negotiations. Right. And so a lot of what's going on right now is there's a question of whether or not the U.S. will be able to get Russia to decrease the concessions it's demanding. Because at this point, we've seen and heard from U.S. and Ukrainian officials that they're willing to move forward with a deal to end the war, and they can't say the same for Russia. And so the U.S. is now somewhat is put in somewhat of a difficult position where you have one side who's agreed to the ceasefire, and the other side, which is the aggressor in the conflict. And so we've seen President Trump put pressure on President Zelensky to get him to agree. But now that President Zelensky has, we're waiting to see if President Trump can pressure President Putin to agree to the deal. But so far, that has eluded all sides. And it should be noted that Vladimir Putin was the reason the war began and is the reason the war has continued for more than 3 years now. And he individually, unilaterally, has the ability to end the war anytime he wants, and has chosen not to because he still has the maximalist goals that he had when he started the war to begin with.
Thank you, Mike. You can read Mike and the rest of our national security team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.